Michael Carter thought it would be nothing more than another long, weary drive home after spending the entire day buried in a cross-border trafficking case. His mind was heavy, his body sore, and the only thing he wanted was the quiet comfort of home. But life has a cruel way of twisting the ordinary into something unforgettable. That night, when he slowed for a man curled on the roadside clutching his stomach, Michael's world changed forever. The moment that stranger slid into the back seat, what should have been a routine act of compassion turned into a nightmare. Cold hands clamped down across Michael's mouth, a cord pulled tight around his throat, and in that suffocating instant, his only ally was Rex, the scarred German shepherd who had never once failed him. What followed was a desperate struggle, a test of loyalty and betrayal, and a reminder that true courage comes only from the kind of bond a man and his dog carry deep in their souls. What you're about to hear will make you believe in hope again. Tell me where you're listening from. Write your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The night in Border Springs, a small, lonely town near the Texas-Mexico line, carried the heavy stillness that comes after a spring rain. A fine drizzle misted across the windshield, turning the amber glow of the highway lamps into smudged halos of light and softening the jagged silhouettes of mesquite trees that lined the empty road. The only sound was the steady hum of tires on wet asphalt, a low rhythm that could almost lull a tired man into forgetting the dangers that always lingered in the borderlands. Lieutenant Michael Carter, 38 years old, leaned deeper into the seat of his black Ford Interceptor. He was tall and wiry, built less by weightlifting and more by long years of chasing shadows, running on little sleep and working cases until exhaustion claimed him. His brown hair, once thick, now carried streaks of gray at the temples. His storm-gray eyes, sharp but tired, carried the kind of look only a man who had studied too many crime scene photos could understand. Michael rarely raised his voice, but grief clung to him like a second skin. And that grief had a name: Thomas Carter, his father. Thomas had once been the pride of Border Springs County, a decorated sheriff who believed in the badge more than in his own safety. But when Michael was just 19, Thomas was killed during a failed undercover sting. The cartel showed no mercy, only violence and questions that would never have answers. That night left Michael with a scar that could not heal, shaping everything he became. To him, wearing the badge was no career choice. It was a vow, a promise that no one else would suffer what he and his mother had endured. Every case, every late night, every sacrifice came back to that silent oath. Now, after 14 hours combing through trafficking files and tracing routes where children had vanished into shadows, Michael wanted nothing more than to get home. Yet the stillness of the highway did not soothe him. Instead, it made him restless, his thoughts circling back to the names in those dossiers, missing sons and daughters reduced to nothing but ink on paper. Beside him sat Rex, his one true partner. Rex was a 10-year-old German shepherd, his sable, coat streaked with silver age. Old scars marked his body, the worst a limp in his hind leg from an injury years back in a raid gone wrong. One ear bent permanently forward, giving him a rugged look of imperfection. Yet his amber eyes remained sharp, alive, and full of vigilance. Rex had once served in the narcotics unit. He and Michael had stormed warehouses, tracked fugitives through backcountry brush, and uncovered stashes buried deep in barns. The dog had saved Michael's life more times than he could count. And when Rex retired, Michael hadn't let him go. Their bond was not professional. It was family. The drizzle thickened into mist, clinging to the windshield in sheets. Michael rolled his shoulders against the ache of fatigue and reached out to pat Rex's head. "You smell that too, don't you, boy?" he murmured. Rex had been on edge for the last mile, nose twitching, ears pricked despite his age. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. His father's words came back to him. Trust the dog before you trust yourself. They see what we can't. Passing a row of abandoned billboards, their paint long peeled into ghost-like smears, Michael felt a prickle race down his spine. The signs once bragged about casinos across the border, but now they loomed as hollow, relics of promises long dead. His thoughts drifted backward. He remembered standing at his father's funeral, the folded flag pressed into his arms, the crushing weight of it. He had sworn then that the cartel would never break another Carter, not out of revenge, but out of duty, to make sure no other child stood where he stood, watching their world collapse. The hum of the engine stayed steady, but Rex shifted, fogging, the glass with his breath growl deepening. Michael frowned. "Easy, Rex. Just the night messing with us." But even as he said it, he knew better. Rex did not growl at shadows. Michael slowed, scanning the roadside. His headlights revealed little more than grass heavy with dew, stretching into the dark desert plain. The emptiness looked endless, but he knew out here silence was never truly empty. He twisted the radio dial, seeking the comforting crackle of dispatch chatter. Only static answered, filling the cabin and deepening the isolation. For a moment, the weight of his father's absence pressed down harder. If Thomas were alive, he'd know what to do, whether to pull over, whether to draw his weapon, whether to trust the dog beside him. Michael rubbed his jaw and whispered, "Guess it's just you and me, partner." The words seemed to calm Rex, if only slightly. The growl softened into quiet vigilance. Outside, fog crept low, hugging the road like a pale blanket. The headlights carved two beams through the mist, revealing only more silence ahead. But Michael knew silence was a liar. Out here, danger often hid behind stillness. And tonight, something in his gut told him he wasn't just driving home. He and Rex were being drawn into something unseen, something waiting. The town lights of Border Springs were still miles away when Michael reached the bend of Highway 42. The road narrowed between a dry creek bed and a dead line of eucalyptus. Trees. The asphalt gleamed wet, polished by drizzle, slick and dark. Rex sat upright now, gaze unblinking, ears tilted forward. Michael stretched his neck, exhaustion making his thoughts heavy, when a sudden shape appeared in the beam of his headlights. Curled along the shoulder, barely moving, lay a man. His body was twisted, arms clutching his stomach, rocking in pain. Michael's foot hit the brake. The figure was a man in his mid-40s, hoodie soaked through, jeans stained, face pale and drawn. His breath came in shallow gasps, his skin shiny with sweat. He looked like he had fallen mid-step, crumpled under some invisible weight. Michael leaned out the window. "Sir, are you injured?" The man raised his head just enough to whisper. "Please, my stomach. Something's wrong. I'm going to pass out." Michael glanced in the mirror. The highway behind him stretched into endless black. His instincts warned him not to stop. Strangers on the border could mean trouble. But there was something pitiful in the way the man clung to himself, shivering in pain. Against his better judgment, Michael shifted into park, one hand never straying. Far from his sidearm, Rex growled, nose pressed hard against the glass, ears stiff. Michael stepped out, boots crunching damp gravel. The man moaned as if even lifting his head took all his strength. "Where are you hurt?" Michael asked, his voice low but steady. "Fear?" The man coughed, clutching his stomach. "Lower, sharp, like a knife. I need hospital. Please." Michael studied him, cautious. He reached down, touching the man's shoulder. The fabric was soaked, the skin beneath clammy. "Can you stand?" The man nodded faintly. Michael helped him up. He was shorter, wiry, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Up close, he smelled sharp and metallic, not of alcohol, but of copper and sweat. Michael opened the rear door of the cruiser. "Slowly. Get in." The man climbed in with a groan. Rex barked once, sharp and warning. "It's all right," Michael whispered, more to himself than to Rex. He slid back into the driver's seat, the silence pressing in. Only the low hum of the heater and Rex's breathing filled the cabin. Michael glanced at the rearview mirror. "What's your name?" "Eric," the man muttered. "Eric Mendes." Michael didn't respond right away. His hands stayed firm on the wheel as he flicked a switch on the dash, logging the stop into his onboard system. He made a mental note, to verify the name later. "Where are you headed, Eric?" "Clinic in town. I don't have a car. I was walking, then it hit me like a hammer." Michael nodded slowly. He shifted into drive and pulled back onto the highway. The cruiser picked up speed, slicing through mist and drizzle. The night felt heavier now. 5 minutes passed in silence. Then headlights appeared from the opposite direction, a dim, sputtering pickup truck. It passed slowly, the driver lifting a hand halfway in greeting before recognizing Michael. The truck rolled by a beat behind, and Michael recognized the man behind the wheel. Javier Velasco, early 50s, brown-skinned, weathered face, heavy calluses on his hands. A Mexican-born farm laborer who'd been working in Border Springs since before Michael joined the force. 3 years ago, Michael had caught him shoplifting diapers and powdered milk from a corner store. Instead of arresting him, he'd paid for the items and told Javier to get help from the church pantry. They hadn't spoken since. Tonight, Javier gave a look that lingered longer than a wave. His eyes flicked from Michael to the back seat, narrowing slightly before Head drove on without, stopping. Michael stared at the taillights shrinking in the mirror. "Friend of yours?" Eric asked, his voice almost too casual. Michael didn't answer. Rex shifted in the front seat. The dog had barely moved since they left the roadside, but now his body grew rigid. His ears stood upright, nostrils flaring. Slowly, silently, Rex turned his head and fixed his gaze over his shoulder. Michael saw it too. Rex wasn't growling yet, but his hackles were rising, the fur along his spine standing up like a ridge of warning. The cruiser's cabin seemed to tighten. Eric let out a quiet cough and adjusted in his seat. "Dog doesn't like me, huh?" Michael kept his eyes on the road. He doesn't like a lot of people, but he's usually right. Rex didn't look away. The dog's amber eyes were locked on Eric, and every inch of his posture screamed unease. Ears sharp, breath held, body halfway tensed, as if preparing for a signal that hadn't yet come. The tires hummed steadily as the cruiser moved deeper into the fog-laced stretch of Highway 42. The trees on either side pressed in like shadows, their gnarled limbs twitching in the wind. The road felt narrower here, the kind of place where even sound seemed to hesitate. Michael glanced briefly at the mirror. Eric sat in the back, slouched, but no longer moaning. His hands rested suspiciously low in his lap, and his eyes were half-lidded, not from pain, but calculation. Rex hadn't stopped staring at him. The dog's body was still rigid, his breathing shallow, his hackles still raised. Michael felt it in his chest now, a tension that had settled in like a second heartbeat. Something wasn't right. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps a warning, perhaps just a release of pressure. But before the first syllable could form, movement erupted behind him. A soaked rag clamped suddenly over Michael's mouth, yanked back with brutal force. Simultaneously, a cord, rough-braided, tightened around his neck, dragging him backward into the seat. Michael choked instinctively, reaching up to tear it free. His vision blurred, the rag-rire of ammonia and something acrid, not enough to knock him out instantly, but enough to disorient. His foot slipped from the gas pedal, the cruiser, swerving slightly as the steering wheel veered. Eric's voice came low, snarling in his ear. "Should have minded your own business." Michael's fingers clawed at the cord, but the strength behind it was ruthless. Eric had been faking weakness. Every ounce of his performance had been crafted to get him close, and now he was finishing the job. Rex exploded. The German shepherd. launched over the center console with a vicious snarl, his front paws striking the edge of the seat as he hurled himself into the back with terrifying speed. The sound of his growl was raw and primal, and then came the impact, the deep crunch of teeth meeting flesh. Eric screamed. His grip faltered, just long enough for Michael to wrench the cord free from his throat and lurch forward, gasping. The cruiser, jolted Ash's elbow, knocked the gear shift. His foot hit the brake too late. The vehicle veered violently to the right, skidding across the wet shoulder. There was a sickening lurch, then the thump of the front tires dropping into a shallow ditch. Mud sprayed across the side panels as the rear tires spun against the incline, trying and failing Torrigan traction. The cruiser came to rest at a slight tilt. Its headlights beamed out into the trees ahead, illuminating a weather-worn green sign half-shrouded in vines. Border Springs, Cramere. Michael coughed hard, throat burning, eyes stinging. He reached for his holster, but paused at the sound of Rex still growling behind him. He twisted in his seat. Eric was curled in the back seat now, his jacket sleeve shredded, blood leaking from a deep gash along his forearm where Rex had bitten down. The man was cradling his arm and glaring not in pain, but in rage. Michael drew his weapon and leveled it at Eric. "Don't move." Eric froze. "You're dead anyway. You don't even know who you're dealing with." Michael's voice was hoarse sorrow. "Start talking." Eric didn't answer. His breathing was heavy, uneven. Blood trickled down his hand, soaking the fabric of his hoodie. Rex stood, between the seats, growling softly. Fangs bared, still ready to strike again if needed. Michael opened the driver's door slowly, stepped out into the drizzle, and aimed his weapon at the back door. "Out now." Eric hesitated. "On your stomach, hands where I can see them." When the man finally obeyed and stumbled out, Michael kicked his legs out from under him, forcing him down into the wet gravel. The cuff clicks echoed sharply under the soft patter of rain. Michael tightened them harder than necessary. He'd earned it. As he stood there, catching his breath, headlights lit up. The road behind them. A truck was approaching slowly, hesitantly. Michael's heart jumped. Could be help. Could be backup. Could be no. The truck passed. Just another driver who saw trouble and didn't want to be part of it. Michael dragged Eric toward the side of the cruiser and leaned him roughly against the fender. The man smirked through the pain. "You think this ends with me? I'm just the first. They sent me because you were close to something. You don't even know what you've stepped into." Michael didn't respond. His throat still burned. He walked around to check the front of the cruiser. The ditch wasn't deep, but the right tires were, sunken in thick mud. They'd need a tow to get out. Behind him, Rex circled slowly, tail rigid, staying close. His breathing had steadied, but the tension in his body hadn't gone away. Michael ran a hand down Rex's back, voice low. "You saved my life again, buddy." Rex leaned into his touch for a brief moment, then returned to staring at the restrained man like he was daring him to move. The wind picked up slightly. The sound of cicadas in the grass returned, a strange contrast to the violence that had just occurred. For a fleeting moment, the night felt still again until Michael looked at the signal head. 3 from Border Springs. Too close, too planned. Michael's mind spun. If Eric was sent to kill him before reaching town, who else was waiting inside it? But those questions would come later. Right now, he had a suspect in cuffs, a cruiser in a ditch, and a dog that had just reminded him why loyalty was never just a word. It was a force. Rain dripped from the brim of Michael's patrol cap as he stood beside the cruiser, one hand gripping the cuffed shoulder of Eric Mendes, the other trying to get a radio signal through the static. The wind had picked up again, pulling at the soaked edges of his dark navy uniform. Fog drifted through the trees, masking the world in shifting gray. The cruiser's tires were still buried in the muddy ditch, headlights casting long beams through the rain onto the empty highway. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I have a suspect in custody. Attempted assault on officer, requesting immediate backup and vehicle recovery 2 mi southeast of Border Springs. He released the button. Static. No reply. He tried again. Nothing. Michael's jaw tightened. Head adjusted the frequency dial, switched to a backup channel, but every attempt met with the same heavy wall of silence. The radio wasn't dead. It had been jammed. Behind him, Rex remained at full attention. The German shepherd stood with all four, paws planted squarely on the slick gravel, muscles taut, watching Eric like a sentinel. Every time the man shifted, even slightly, Rex growled low in his throat. "You think jamming your radio is going to save you?" Eric sneered from his seat on the wet ground, his wounded arm held awkwardly. Blood had dried in dark rivulets down his sleeve. "They're already closer than you think," Michael said. Nothing. He stepped back and scanned the tree line on both sides of the road. The fog made it difficult to see more than 100 FT ahead. Still, something about the silence felt wrong, not empty, but watched. Then Rex snapped his head to the left. His ears spry-cricked forward. A second later, he barked a sharp, forceful sound that echoed through the mist like a warning flare. Michael followed the dog's line of sight. Down the road, just beyond the reach of the headlights, a black SUV sat parked beneath a crooked oak tree. Its engine was off, lights dimmed, barely visible in the murk. The vehicle hadn't been there earlier. Michael would have noticed. He took 2 slow steps forward, one hand drifting toward his weapon. "Rex, stay." But Rex didn't budge. His growl deepened. Inside the SUV, a silhouette sat motionless behind the wheel. No door opened, no window rolled down. The driver didn't even flinch when Rex began barking again, this time more aggressively. The bark sliced through the drizzle like thunder. After a long beat, the SUV's engine turned over with a quiet rumble. Its headlights blinked on. Then the vehicle reversed, tires spinning slightly in the mud before making a tight turn and speeding away into the fog. Michael sprinted forward, but it was too late. All that remained was the faint echo of retreating wheels and a clear set of fresh tire tracks etched in the wet gravel. He crouched beside the marks and pressed 2 fingers to the cold surface. Deep. Treads, wide spacing, off-road tires, military-grade or cartel-equipped. He stood slowly. They were watching. Eric chuckled behind him. "Told you you're not the one doing the hunting anymore." Michael turned sharply. "They sent you to kill me before I reached the town." Eric gave a lopsided smile, half mocking, half proud. "If I'd done my job right, you'd already be in the trunk of that SUV, bagged and burned by morning." Rex let out another bark. And this time, even Michael flinched at the volume. He looked down at his partner. "Easy, Rex." The dog quieted, but this stance remained defensive. His gaze didn't move from Eric. Michael tugged the zip ties around Eric's wrists tighter. "Who jammed? The signal? Who's in that SUV?" Eric just stared at him, defiant. Michael crouched lower so their eyes met. "You're a low-level enforcer. You don't get sent to silence cops unless you know something they don't want exposed." Eric's lips curled, but he said nothing. Michael stood. The fog began to lift slightly, enough to show the shape of the road ahead, bending toward the outskirts of Border Springs. But now it looked different, more like a funnel than a path, narrowing toward something hidden, controlled. He opened the cruiser's trunk and pulled out a portable signal booster, an old unit battery powered, used in out-of-range terrain. He clipped it to his vest, turned it on, and waited. The hum of the unit buzzed against his chest. After 10 seconds, his radio crackled to life. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42. Do you copy?" A pause. Then static shifted into words. "Unit 42, we read you. Your signal's faint. What's your location?" 2 mi southeast of Border Springs on Route 42. I've got a suspect in custody. Attempted murder. Backup requested. Acknowledged. Officers in route. Michael exhaled for the first time in minutes. He clipped the radio back to his shoulder. Eric sat quietly now, but his eyes roamed the tree-line. He was expecting someone who wouldn't be happy he'd failed. Michael turned his attention back to Rex. The dog was still alert, but had relaxed slightly. His coat shimmered wet in the headlights, and his breath came in steady, shallow waves. He was 10 years old, but in moments like this, Rex moved like a creature half that age, driven by something deeper than training. Loyalty, instinct, maybe something spiritual. "Good job, partner," Michael said softly. Rex's ears twitched at the tone, and he gave a low, quiet whine of acknowledgement. The cruiser was still stuck, but the engine ran, heater humming. Michael opened the back door and roughly guided Eric inside, double-checking the cuffs. As he shut the door, his eyes caught one more thing, a symbol etched faintly into the back of Eric's belt. A scorpion coiled over a sunburst. Michael had seen it before. In one of the files from the human trafficking ring he'd been assigned, the cartel's southern cell, the one they hadn't been able to name until now. He stepped back and looked at the black tire tracks leading into the fog. Somewhere out there, someone had been watching, waiting, and now they knew he was alive and aware. But Michael wasn't alone. He had Rex, and that meant he still had a chance. The rain had stopped, but the mist hung low over the hills as dawn threatened to break on the edge of the horizon. Pale silver light began to creep across the sky, pushing the stars into hiding. The air carried the damp scent of soil and distant salt water from the harbor just a few miles south. Michael stood beside the cruiser, arms crossed as he watched Eric. Mendy sit cuffed in the back seat, his smug expression having faded during the long wait for backup that never came. The signal booster had worked briefly, but now even that had begun to flicker with interference. Whatever cartel cell was operating nearby, they were organized, and they had eyes on this stretch of road. Michael opened the door, his voice low and direct. "Start talking, Eric, or the next guy they send might not be so patient." Eric leaned forward. Slowly, his lip twisted into a tired grin. "You want something? I'll give you something. You ever hear of Warehouse 42? Michael didn't answer, but his breath caught slightly. Eric took that as permission. Near the old harbor, just past the yard, abandoned on paper. In real life, it's where people go in, but they don't always come out. Michael's jaw tightened. "Victims' storage," Eric said flatly, "until they get moved or sold or buried." Michael stared at him, then stepped back and shut the door. He stood in silence for several seconds, letting the information settle like silt at the bottom of his mind. Warehouse 42. The name had floated in a few old intel reports, but no one had confirmed it. Now he had a location and a reason. He walked to the passenger side. Rex was seated upright again, no longer growling, but still on alert. His wet fur clung to his flanks, the scar on his hind leg visible where it parted. The dog's eyes tracked Michael's every move, waiting for the next command. Michael leaned down and gave Rex a quick nod. "We've got work to do." He climbed into the driver's seat and radioed dispatch again, but the channel was dead. He wasn't surprised. As he reversed the cruiser out of the ditch with a hard jolt, he made the decision to head back toward the station, but only as far as he needed to regain full calms. He didn't want to bring Eric into Border Springs just yet, not until he knew who was listening. The roads were still slick, the tires kicking up water as the vehicle curved along the ridge road back toward the highway. Rex sat in the back now, positioned next to Eric with a quiet but commanding presence. Eric didn't speak again. Then, just as the woods began to thin and the glow of Border Springs flickered in the distance, a second vehicle appeared. It happened fast. A gray sedan unmarked. No plates burst from a gravel turnout and skidded to a stop sideways across the road, blocking their path entirely. Its headlights flashed once, blinding. Doors began to open. Michael reacted instantly. He yanked the wheel, left, accelerating as fast as the mud allowed, and veered off the road. The cruiser bounced violently, crashing through brush and sliding into the thick woods. Eric shouted in the back as he slammed into the door panel, and Rex barked in alarm as the vehicle lurched forward through a narrow game trail. Michael slammed the brakes, the cruiserfish tailing into a shallow dip, mud spraying across the windshield. They couldn't outrun them, not in the woods. He threw the vehicle into park. Out now. He pulled Eric from the car, dragging him into the underbrush. Rex followed, ears flattened, nose twitching. The trees were tight here, tall pines, old sycamores, and the ground was littered with wet leaves and tangled roots. The air smelled of cedar and livestock. Michael forced Eric to the base of a slope and bound him to a thick branch with reinforced zip ties. Make a sound and Rex finishes what he started. Rex sat nearby, his eyes locked on the man, his body still as stone. Michael crept forward through the underbrush to scout the ridge. Just below the woods opened into a wide pasture bordered by a broken fence. A small farmhouse stood on the edge of the field, the windows glowing faintly. A single porch. Light cast a soft cone of gold onto the mud-soaked yard. A figure moved near the barn. It was a man, mid-50s, stocky, with a gray beard and a brown canvas jacket stained with grease and earth. He carried a flashlight in one hand and a pitchfork in the other, muttering to himself as he walked the perimeter. Michael stepped from the trees slowly, hands raised. "Don't shoot," he said. "Law enforcement." The man jerked upright, startled, but didn't raise his tool. "You with the sheriff's office?" "Lieutenant Michael Carter. My partner and I had to cut off the highway. You see any unfamiliar vehicles come through here?" The man grunted. "Ain't seen a soul, but I heard a car rip down the fire trail about 10 minutes ago. I thought it was some damn kids." He paused. "Name's Otis Franks. This here's my land." Michael nodded. "Anything odd lately? Missing livestock? Tools gone?" Otis sighed, wiping rain from his brow. 3 goats gone 2 nights back. Tracks led into the woods but disappeared. Found a fence section cut clean like someone used bolt cutters. You think this has something to do with those folks in the news? The missing girls. Michael glanced back toward the woods. "Yeah, I do." Then Rex barked once from the trees, sharp and clear. Michael was already moving. He sprinted back toward the trail, boots thudding against the soft earth. When here ached Rex, the dog was sniffing furiously near a thorn bush, tail stiff, ears back, and there, snagged in the bramble, was a strip of cloth. Michael crouched, pulling it free. It was dark blue, soaked through and smeared with dried blood. Stitched into the corner was a logo, Santero Imports. Hare cognized it instantly. Santero Imports was the cover front for a dockside warehouse company that had gone defunct 2 years ago, or so the record said. The address Warehouse 42. Michael stood staring at the torn fabric, the weight of it pressing down like a stone. Eric had told the truth, at least about that part, and now he had proof. By the time the sun breached the horizon, painting the distant sky in dusty oranges and bruised violets, Michael had already crossed the edge of Border Springs. Moudon's sweat clung to him, and Rex, though still alert, moved with a tired gait beside him, his paws dark with forest earth. Eric sat hunched into the back seat, cuffed and silent, his smugness drained to blank calculation. They pulled into the police station's rear lot through the unmarked gate used for secure transfers. The building itself was a modest 2-story brick structure with narrow windows and a faded sheriff's star bolted to the front wall. Inside, the early shift hadn't arrived yet. The station hummed with quiet, just the click of a distant keyboard and the low murmur of the dispatch radio. Michael parked the cruiser near the back entrance, killed the engine, and let the silence settle. Rex watched him, ears twitching slightly, waiting. He dialed from his secure phone. The line clicked twice before connecting. "You still alive?" came the voice on the other end. Cool, clipped, and unmistakably dry. Barely, Michael replied. Sarah, I need you. Agent Sarah Collins, 36, had once been assigned to Border Springs as a federal liaison during a multi-jurisdictional trafficking case. Tall and athletic with short-cropped dark auburn hair and sharp hazel eyes. She moved like someone who had trained her instincts to anticipate violence. Her jawline was lean, her gaze direct, and her wardrobe always utilitarian black slacks. Fitted field jacket, boots that could chase down a man twice her size. She had a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and emotionally unreachable, though those close to her knew better. Years ago, her younger sister had gone missing from a foster home. She'd never been found. That loss had become the unspoken engine of Sarah's career. Within the hour, she walked through the back entrance of the station, hands in her coat pockets, a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. Her presence filled the room like flint striking stone. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting. Michael offered a ghost of a smile. "Nice to see you, too." Sarah glanced toward Rex, he holding up. "He saved my life last night. I'd expect nothing less." Together, they moved into interrogation. Room B. Eric sat at the metal table, wrists cuffed to the steel loop. A smear of dried blood remained on his sleeve. He didn't look up when they entered. Michael leaned against the wall while Sarah stepped forward and placed a folder on the table, flipping it open with deliberate care. "Warehouse 42, she said. "Let's talk." Eric shifted, but said nothing. Sarah stared at him with the quiet patience of someone who knew silence was just another tactic. Michael cut in. "We already have your prints, your photo, and evidence tying you to attempted murder of a law officer. You talk now, maybe you don't disappear into a black site for the rest of your life." Eric sneered. "You think this is over because of one warehouse?" Sarah's voice sharpened, but her volume stayed low. "No, but I think if we burn that warehouse to the ground, a few roaches are going to scatter, and I plan on stepping on every last one." Eric laughed quietly. "Then you better start running." Michael stepped forward. "Where do they keep the victims?" "You said storage. Describe the layout." Eric shook his head. "Even if I did, they'll be gone by the time you get there." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Maybe. But if you're lying and we find bodies, you'll wear every one of those charges personally." The room remained still for several heartbeats. Then slowly Eric leaned forward. Freight entrance on the north side, back room behind the stacked pallets. There's a trap door under the office stairs. Sarah made a note. Her expression unreadable. Outside, the clouds rolled in again, casting the station in a cold, gray shadow. Michael and Sarah walked back into the hallway. Rex padded along beside them. "We'll need a team," Sarah said. "Quiet, fast, no leaks." "I don't want local backup," Michael replied. "Too many unknowns. Could be compromised." "There's a task force based out of Dallas. They owe me a favor," Michael nodded. Before heading back out, he made one more stop. Hank's Diner, a weather-worn cafe 2 blocks from the station. It was the kind of place that smelled of burnt coffee, bacon grease, and the past. An old jukebox stood unplugged in the corner, and a chipped American flag hung above the counter. Behind that counter stood Hank Donnelly, a white-haired veteran, in his 70s with a stiff right leg, a Vietnam tattoo on his forearm, and a habit of calling everyone kid. He ran the diner like a chapel quiet, but full of reverence. When Michael entered with Rex, Hank gave him a once-over and poured black coffee into a chipped mug without asking. "You're walking like you saw hell last night," Hank muttered. "Something close," Michael said, sitting at the bar. Rex sat quietly at his feet, his head resting between his paws, still watchful. Hank reached under the counter and pulled out a faded dog biscuit from a jar, labeled for heroes only. He bent down and held it out to Rex. "He's still got that fire in him," Hank said. You listen to him, kid. Dogs like that, they see what we miss. Michael took a long sip of coffee. Yeah, he said quietly. They do. As he left the diner, the sky opened just slightly. A break in the clouds let through a shaft of sunlight that bathed the cruiser in gold. Rex jumped into the passenger seat without hesitation. In the back of Michael's mind, the image of Warehouse 42 burned like a brand. The war. The war hadn't begun. Yet, but it would, and he wasn't walking into it alone. The sky above the docks was a deep, bruised indigo, the air dense with salt and engine oil. Faint echoes of the ocean lapped against rusted hulls docked nearby, their silhouettes hulking like forgotten beasts in the dark. Warehouse 42 stood at the end of a broken access road, hidden behind a row of decaying freight containers and the remnants of a collapsed loading bay. It looked abandoned. The roof partially caved in, but lights flickered faintly inside, betraying life where there should be none. Michael crouched behind a shipping crate, his breath calm but measured, eyes fixed on the building ahead. Dressed in dark tactical gear, his lean frame was built more for speed than force, and the storm-gray eyes beneath his cap scanned the shadows with the instinct of someone who had spent years chasing ghosts. To his left, Agent Sarah Collins checked her weapon with practiced precision. Her angular face was focused, her hazel eyes sharp. She wore a lightweight Kevlar vest beneath her field jacket, her movements quiet and precise, though her voice had always been clipped and businesslike. Tonight there was a current of steel beneath it. 2 guards posted at the east entrance, she whispered. 3rd man walks the catwalk every 5 minutes. There's a 20-second window after he rounds the back. Michael gave a single nod. At his feet, Rex shifted slightly. The 10-year-old German shepherd with his silver-streaked sable coat and bent ear crouched low but alert. Despite the limp in his back leg, he moved like a predator at full awareness. His eyes intelligent, brown, unwavering, fixed on the warehouse like he understood the stakes. Sarah tapped her calm. Dallas team is in position on the west. We go on, my mark. They waited. In that moment, the wind carried the faintest sound, footsteps perhaps, or the rattle of chains inside the building. Michael's jaw tightened. Then Sarah whispered, "Now they moved like shadows." Michael and Rex flanked left, creeping, alongside the rusted siding toward the freight entrance. Sarah circled right, covering the side staircase. The Dallas team breached from the back with a silent charge, their muffled boots like ghosts through gravel. Michael reached the sliding door, found the lock, and clipped a low-voltage cutter into it. Sparks snapped as the metal hissed open. Rex stayed pressed to his side, tail, ears forward. They slipped inside. The air was cold, damp, and thick with rot. Stacked pallets and crates formed makeshift walls, and overhead, the flicker of cheap industrial lights barely reached the concrete floor. Michael's footfalls were soft. He motioned Rex forward. The dog crept ahead, nose twitching, leading the way through the narrow maze of boxes. Then Rex stopped. His ears twitched. He growled. Michael froze and raised his fist. Sarah appeared at the edge of a corridor of crates. Rifle raised, voices low, tents came from behind the far wall. Michael stepped forward. As they reached a break in the storage stack, the space opened into a larger room, once an office, now gutted. Inside, 6 people sat on the floor, wrists bound, with plastic ties, faces pale and exhausted. Among them was a young woman, barely 20, her face bruised but defiant, her posture straighter than the rest. Sarah moved forward. "Federal agents, you're safe now." The woman looked up sharply. "I'm Elena Morales. Please, my grandfather's Judge Rafael Morales. He'll be looking for me." Michael's heart sank. A federal judge's granddaughter. That explained the urgency. But there was no time to process it. A shout rang out from behind them. Gunfire erupted. Bullets punched into the crates, sending splinters flying. Michael yanked Sarah back as a second shot tore through the siding near her shoulder. From the catwalk above, two men fired down, one armed with an AR-style rifle, the other with a sawed-off shotgun. Sarah ducked into cover and returned fire. The Dallas team converged from the west, their suppressed weapons barking into the fray. Michael turned to Rex. "Stay low. Stay close." Rex growled once, then bolted. One of the gunmen, a wiry man with a shaved head and jagged scars across his cheek, leapt down from the catwalk, landing near the hostages. He drew a long hunting knife and lunged for Michael. Michael moved to intercept, but the man was too fast. The blade glinted in the flickering light, sweeping upward toward Michael's chest. Then Rex struck. With a guttural snarl, the dog leapt between them, teeth sinking into the attacker's forearm mid-swing. The man howled as the knife clattered to the floor. Rex didn't let go. He dragged him down, thrashing with primal force. Michael kicked the blade away and cuffed the man with shaking hands. Blood smeared the concrete. Rex released his hold and staggered back. "Rex!" Michael dropped beside him. The dog whimpered. A shallow cut ran along his left front leg, not deep, but fresh. Michael pressed a cloth against the wound. "You're okay. You're okay." Gunfire continued for another minute before the last of the cartel enforcers were neutralized or in cuffs. The Dallas team secured the rest of the building, and within 10 minutes the hostages had been evacuated to ambulances. Michael sat, with Rex outside the warehouse entrance, his back against the brick wall. Sarah knelt beside them. "He's tough," she said softly. "He's more than that," Michael replied, gently stroking Rex's damp fur. "He's the reason I'm still breathing." Rex rested his head on Michael's thigh, eyes fluttering shut, but his tail thumped once, slow and steady. Inside the building, federal agents began photographing evidence, marking crates, and cataloging the horrors stored inside. But for now, Michael's world had narrowed to one old dog and the fire that still burned in his heart. The morning after, the raid arrived, slow and golden, casting long streaks of light across the still smoking remains of Warehouse 42. Emergency crews were finishing the last sweep of the premises. The rusted metal siding was scorched and pockmarked from gunfire. But the building no longer held secrets. It held evidence. Dozens of federal agents moved through the site like clockwork, logging items, photographing every room, and escorting the rescued victims into waiting medical vans. The fog of the night had lifted, and with it a sense of dread that had hung over Border Springs for too long. Michael stood near the warehouse entrance, bruised but steady, watching as officers led away the final suspect in cuffs. The man was tall, with sunken eyes and slicked-back gray hair. His name was Bobby Calderon, a name that had circled the edges of Michael's investigation for months. Until now, Bobby had always been one step removed: clean records, charitable donations, a public persona built around philanthropy. But the look on his face as he was pressed against the hood of a patrol truck was devoid of pretense. Bobby didn't speak, didn't struggle. He simply stared at Michael with a vacant chill, as if silently acknowledging the game was over. Michael turned away. Sarah approached from the west exit, her jacket smudged with soot, her hair tied back in a hasty bun. Her sharp hazel eyes met his with a flicker of quiet triumph. "He folded fast," she said. "Records, locations, and enough witness accounts to bury him 10 times over." "Let's make sure he stays buried," Michael replied. Beside him, Rex sat patiently, his injured leg wrapped in gauze. Though the cut was shallow, Michael had insisted on getting him checked out the moment the building was secure. At that moment, the animal control van pulled up, but Michael waved it off. "I'll take him myself." An hour later, Michael stepped into the Border Springs Veterinary Clinic, a modest brick building at the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Behind the counter stood Dr. Evelyn Maddox, a tall woman in her early 50s. With short silver hair and the warm, non-nonsense demeanor of someone who had delivered both FO and death notices. She took one look at Rex and knelt beside him, running her fingers carefully over the bandage. "He's lucky," she murmured. Cut didn't hit anything vital. Tendons are intact. He'll have a limp for a few weeks, but nothing permanent. Michael released the breath he'd been holding. He crouched beside Rex, resting his hand on the dog's head. He saved my life again. Dr. Maddox smiled gently. Then I'd say, you're both lucky. As Michael stood to leave, the door opened and a familiar voice called, "Out, Lieutenant Carter." It was Elena Morales, dressed in clean civilian clothes. Now, her face still marked by the shadows of trauma, but her posture strong. With her was an older man in a tailored charcoal suit and heavy M glasses, Judge Rafael Morales, her grandfather. His expression was stern, dignified, but his eyes glistened as he looked at his granddaughter. Behind them stood Otis Franks, the stocky farmer with the grizzled beard and stained canvas jacket who had first pointed Michael to the cartel's forest trail. "We heard you were here," Elena said softly. Michael straightened, unsure how to respond, but the judge stepped forward and offered his hand. "You didn't just save my granddaughter," he said. "You exposed something we didn't want to admit existed this close to home. I presided over too many trafficking cases to count. But this," he shook his head, "this was personal." Michael nodded, then turned as Otis stepped forward. The older man held something in his callous hand. A collar, thick brown leather with a polished silver tag. "I had this made this morning," Otis said. "Figured your partner earned it." He knelt beside Rex and fastened the collar gently around his neck. Etched into the tag in block lettering were the words, "Guardian." Rex blinked once, then leaned forward and licked the man's hand. "You've got yourself one hell of a dog," Otis said. "I know," Michael replied, voice quiet. They stepped outside together, the group parting ways with quiet nods and hands on shoulders. The clinic door closed softly behind them. Michael walked slowly back to his cruiser, Rex padding beside him. They reached the hill that overlooked Border Springs just as the first true rays of sunlight broke across the valley. From this angle, the town looked peaceful again, the rooftops still wet with dew, smoke curling gently from chimneys, and people moving along sidewalks alive, unaware of the war that had raged just miles from their homes. Michael stood there for a long while, letting the breeze press against his face. Rex sat beside him, head high, chest steady, his guardian collar catching the light. They didn't need to speak. In silence, they shared the moment man and dog, soldier and sentinel. Justice had come with scars, but it had come. And in that dawn, beneath the open sky of Border Springs, Michael believed in something again, not just in law or duty, but in the quiet, enduring power of loyalty. In the end, it wasn't just the badge that brought justice to Border Springs. It was the bond between a man and his dog, the quiet strength of loyalty, the courage to stand when others fall, and the unspoken love that never asks for anything in return. Rex, once discarded as too old, too broken, proved that faithfulness doesn't fade with time. It deepens. Some might call it instinct. Others might call it training. But those who have truly known a dog like Rex will understand it was something more. Assilent miracle, a whisper from God reminding us that his angels don't always come with wings. Sometimes they come with scars, a wagging tail, and a heart that never stops guarding ours. In a world that too often forgets the value of quiet heroes, the story reminds us loyalty is a light in the darkest places. Love still shows up bleeding, limping, but never backing down. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Type Amen in the comments if you believe that every loyal soul, human or animal, is a miracle sent by God. Subscribe for more stories of hope, healing, and the silent angels among us. May God bless you and those you